portal fantasy is hard to write. For the uninitiated, portal fantasy is quite simple to explain. A character starts in one world, they find a portal of some sort, and it takes them into another world. Despite this, there are a lot of variations on this basic idea, and a lot of ways to do it wrong. To do it in a way that seems cheap or tawdry, or in a way that kind of ends up disgracing both the human world and the fantastical world, and either offering sentimental wish fulfillment, or being very unintentionally cruel, or sometimes both. It's a very tricky genre to get right, because even when the characters are in the fantastical world, you as the writer or as the reader have to keep an eye on the mundane world. Will they come back? What will happen if they don't come back? Should they be forced to come back? All these are hard questions to consider. Anyway, considering that the two shows we are going to be discussing today are both heavily anime influenced, I should probably note that in Japanese these are called isekai stories. And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Sekai is one of the few Japanese words I do know. It means world, so sekai, different world. Makes sense. Now, stories like this are not new, far from it. Tales of heroes journeying to vast and different lands, or even to the afterlife, are older than Homer. They have existed as long as the hero's journey itself has existed. In fact, the whole journey to another world is a major part of the hero's journey story, and a major part of a lot of different mythologies, as people started to recognize in the late 19th century. You have Fraser's Golden Bough, which is outdated and condescending in a lot of ways, but it does very much cling on to this idea that there is this cycle of journeying and regeneration that powers a lot of these different mythologies that are otherwise disconnected. But of course, some of the portal fantasy stories that we get these days are a bit different because the two worlds are hermetically sealed. We have this one world, the mundane world, that has no knowledge of the other world, and you have the other world, which is basically like its own thing. It's not just metaphorical or symbolic. It is its own separate world, even its own separate universe, and it doesn't know anything about, or at least it has very little contact with, the mundane world. There are very few people traveling between those two worlds, aside from our hero. The two stories we are going to be discussing today both fit under this description, so it is worth discussing one of the most famous classical stories that also fits under this description. This being the story of Urashima Taro, in which a man travels to an underwater kingdom for what he believes is only a couple days. He meets a mysterious princess, and she gives him a treasure chest and tells him not to open it. He gets back to the world from which he came and realizes that a lot of time has passed and everyone he knew isn't there. They're dead. So he's distraught, but he still has this box, so he opens the box only to realize that it contained his age. So he ages rapidly and he dies. That is why the princess told him never to open the box. Now, there are variations on this story, but that's the basic idea. It's a very sad and heartbreaking story, even by the standards of old fairy tales, and I remember being shaken by this when I saw an adaptation of it in elementary school. It was a short film, I believe, possibly just a half-hour TV film, but it shook me in a way that not a lot of stories had back when I was that young. If you want a modern, relativity-infused version of the story, I highly recommend a story called The Mermaid Astronaut. It's by a fantastic writer named Yoon Ha Lee, and it was published in one of my personal favorite speculative fiction magazines, Beneath Ceaseless Skies. If you haven't checked it out, both the story and the magazine, I can't recommend it highly enough. With the story of Urashima Taro and other works that very much follow in that same mold, such as The Mermaid Astronaut, viscerally understand is that there is something innately enigmatic and mysterious and dark about the relationship between the two worlds. When they collide, it's destabilizing. Even in Portal fantasy that is much less overtly tinged by tragedy, such as, say, Spirited Away or The Chronicles of Narnia, there is the sense that the two worlds are separate for a reason. They operate on different rules. This is very much different from Harry Potter, wherein the magical world is kind of mundane. Spells are something you can learn in books. They're something you can go to school for and study. There are things wizards can do that ordinary muggles can't, but other than that, the wizarding and human worlds do not really operate on different planes of existence. They're both kind of mundane. So it kind of forces one to consider why these two worlds have to be so separate in the first place. In works like those I've otherwise been discussing, the two worlds are different. They are separate realms, and bringing them together, setting them into a clashing collision, is not a decision to be made lightly. My favorite example of how a show can maturely handle such a collision in a sociological way is The Legend of Korra. Korra Season 2 is hated by a lot of people for a lot of reasons. I personally think it's actually kind of genius despite its flaws. And a big reason I think that is because it has Korra make the very bold decision to keep the human and spirit worlds connected. Now, obviously this is not exactly the same as some of the other examples I've made, because the ordinary Avatar world is very much enchanted, unlike our reality. There are people who can do magic, and there are very spiritual, enigmatic places, like the swamp, that have things for which no rational explanation is really possible. Nonetheless, Korra handles the decision of bringing the two worlds together with empathy, nuance, and maturity. It's not an absolute good or an absolute evil. It's simply a choice Korra made, and she has to deal with the consequences of it. She has to take on the burden for making that choice. Everything good that happens as a result of her deciding to keep the portals open can very much be credited to her. And everything bad that happens as a result of that decision can also be credited to her. It's not a universally good decision, and it's not a simple decision, and it's a decision that Korra has to deal with. It's not something she can just shrug off, ever. And I appreciate the show for handling such a difficult concept with so much grace and thoughtfulness. Amphibia is not that philosophically layered, it's not that sociologically thoughtful, but its character dynamics are at least as good, if you ask me. It centers on these three friends who have to decide whether they are going to return home. They're stuck in this fantasy world, and ostensibly they're all trying to get back. In reality, things are a little messier than that. And the stubborn but compassionate protagonist, who is a caring person, but who can nonetheless be very impulsive and refuse to really think things through. She wants to get back to her old life because she misses her family, and she misses the old life she had, and she just assumes that her friends that got trapped in here with her will feel the same way, and they don't. Sasha and Marcy are more interesting to me, and the show is sympathetic to their desires to not really want to go back. Marcy explicitly doesn't want to go back. And while Marcy definitely errs by the end of this season, she's not wrong because she wants to stay here, or she's important and helpful and fulfilled instead of going back to her old life as a dorky nerd that everyone makes fun of. Even Anne called Earth Marcy the clumsiest person alive. Amphibia Marcy is cool, she's competent, she's electrifying. Why would she want to leave behind that life? The show doesn't condemn her for not wanting to leave it behind. It condemns her for wanting to trap her friends here with her forever. That is a problem. You can at least understand where she's coming from. She loves her friends. She wants to stay with them forever. And she has it in her mind that they will stay together forever. It's a child's idea, but it's something we can really empathize with, especially since Marcy doesn't really seem to have any other friends, and her life back on Earth was one of escapism. She just wanted to get out of there. She didn't like her old life, and the only good thing about that life was her friends, so she wants her old friends here in her new, better life. And it's worth noting that although Marcy does have authority in this world, she doesn't have authority because some mystic force came down and gave her the power to be awesome. She has authority because she's proven herself. It is true that the king, Andreas, is overly nice to her because he's secretly manipulating her, but the other people of Amphibia genuinely like Marcy. They appreciate how helpful she's been. They appreciate how she's been able to protect the city of Newtopia. Sasha, my favorite character in the show, is honestly even more interesting to me because she doesn't know what she wants. A truth she admits to herself in the season 2 finale. While others call her selfish, I think this is a really reductionist mischaracterization of Sasha. True, she tries to impose what she believes is best on other people, and that's obviously not okay, but she does this because she cares about them, and she wants what's best for them, and she wants to see them succeed, as the show very explicitly points out in the Battle of the Bands. Sasha doesn't know what she wants for herself. She can't possibly really be selfish because she's much more concerned with other people than she is with herself. She constantly thinks about others and tries to get them what's best for them. In hindsight, it's pretty clear that she wants to get Anne back to Earth in Season 1 because she believes Earth is better for Anne, not because she herself, Sasha, really wants to go back. In Season 2, she helps with the Toad Rebellion because she's really close to Grime. He's been there for her, so she wants to help him in return. That is completely and utterly understandable. It's not because she wants to be a ruler. We see that she's dissatisfied when the rebellion does succeed. She just wants those people she cares about to care about her. I imagine that Sasha has no real strong feelings toward her parents, and I imagine they have no real strong feelings toward her. She has no desire to get back to them. So here we have 3 young women with 3 different perspectives, and the show doesn't demonize any of them. Now, it is true that Season 2 does end on Earth, for at least Anne, so there is a bit of mixing between the 2 worlds, but the boundaries between the 2 worlds still remain clear, and the 2 worlds still have this metaphorical value. They're used as a way for us to really see how these 3 young women really think about the world and what they really want. Star vs. the Forces of Evil, however, does not handle the multiple worlds scenario that well. In the last episode, Cleaved, all the worlds are just clumsily shoved together. It could be interesting if they were in the mind of actually wanting to analyze the consequences of this, but they're not. This isn't Korra, and as an untroublesome happy ending, it just doesn't really work for me. It's done cheaply and sentimentally and without any real psychological or sociological analysis. It really seems like it's done more than anything to get the show's central couple together. Now, I'm a romantic at heart. I will usually root for a show's couple if they're not terrible. Or, as in the case of Avatar, if the show gives us textual reasons to not think the central couple is a good idea. But there's no dwelling on the ramifications of this. There's no curiosity or interest in the socio-political aspects of this. Now, I don't need the show to analyze the fallout of merging these worlds together with the same level of nuance as The Legend of Korra does. If it just wants this to be this fun finale, I should be able to buy that. One reason I don't is because the last 2 seasons of the show do feel kind of rushed. Or not just rushed, they're just kind of incoherent. We say it's rushed because we think that if there were just more episodes, they could have ironed out some of the kinks, but a lot of it's not a result of not having enough time, it's just a result of not spending the time you have on the things that are actually important. In terms of the ending of the show, I just want it to have some acknowledgement that this is not some perfect happy-go-lucky ending. I just want it to acknowledge that it's at least a little imperfect, a little prone to more problems popping up, problems that will sufficiently shift the status quo. It's an ending that offers the illusion of catharsis without really considering the implications of the ending. And when I say consider the ramifications, I don't mean in a nitpicky cinema sense, "Oh, don't you know that people might not be able to breathe the same air," kind of thing if they're on different planets? You know the kind of pedantry I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the themes the show has been explicitly talking about. Those should be handled in a satisfactory way. That's what I care about. It reminds me a little of Change Your Mind, the series finale of Steven Universe, if you don't count the movie or Steven Universe Future. But at least Change Your Mind felt like an honest resolution to the psychological story going on, the personal story, even if it's kind of iffy from a socio-political standpoint, and it just ignores a lot of the issues the show has explicitly brought up in the past. But the ending of Star is like the ending of Steven Universe, in that it absolutely does not deserve the vitriol it has gotten. Really, no show deserves that, not even the Game of Thrones ending. Maybe the Dexter ending, who knows. But in the case of Dexter, it's at least arguable, but in most cases, including these 2 shows, it's not. It's just that these are endings that feel kind of poorly thought out, and don't really seem like a satisfying cap to the show that we've been watching all this time. It feels like it lacks catharsis, and not in a daring way, but just in a way that demonstrates that not a lot of other options are really being considered here. At the end of Star, there is the choice to destroy magic, and no real consideration of the implications. No real consideration of bringing this demystified, demagified world into contact with industrial modernity. That seems like a problem, and the show just completely ignores it. I don't need all the questions to be answered. I just need to know that the show is very concerned with giving these characters and this world a resolution that does not feel like both cheap sentimentality and something that's secretly horrific in a way the show doesn't really seem to recognize. Amphibia understands what makes these kinds of stories work. Star versus the forces of evil kind of doesn't, despite the strengths of that show, and that's disappointing. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. I'm sorry this video got a little long. I am starting to get with Amphibia like I get about Avatar, wherein if you get me talking about it, I'll stay talking about it for like 20, 30 minutes, even if I don't intend to. So, a bit sorry for that, but hope you enjoyed the video. See y'all soon. I'll have a new video for you within a couple days. You can be sure of that. Adios, comrades.